underneath, rolled onto his stomach and lay motionless until his breathing returned to normal and he was satisfied he hadn't been pursued. Then, moving as quietly and efficiently as he could, he opened his backpack and took out his balaclava and a pair of overtrousers. He put these on, then pulled on a pair of woolen gloves as well. He knew that the drone's thermal imaging technology would have a harder time detecting him through insulated clothing. Then he took off his red jacket and exchanged it for a darker-coloured fleece, tucking the hem of the fleece into the waistband of his trousers. Every inch of his body was now covered, except for the slot over his eyes. They were looking for him. They were on the alert. Better to wait a day or two, he thought. Let them think he'd left the area. Then undertake a spot of surveillance of his own. Mira lifted up the tendrils of a strawberry plant to pour a dilution of tomato food into the soil. As Shelley knelt to disperse loose straw over the ground, the sound of an aircraft engine split the air, and she looked up to see that Mira had downed her tools and was already striding up the hill towards the airstrip. "Wait for me," Shelley called out, pulling off her gloves. The plane had landed and taxied to a halt by the time they reached the airstrip, and Lemoyne was getting out. "I've been in California," he said by way of a greeting. "I brought you something." He took a Ziploc bag out of his pocket and held it up so they could see what it contained. A tiny piece of watercolour paper, barely bigger than a bus ticket, divided into squares like a miniature loyalty card. Each square had been stamped with a turquoise five-pointed star. Shelley didn't know what it was. Mira was already shaking her head and holding up both hands. "No thanks," she said. "Not for me." Lemoyne grinned. "It's a housewarming present," he said, passing the bag to Shelley instead. "I'm going to stay over. I thought we could all sample some of this together. Everyone should try it at once. We use it all the time with startups as a kind of bonding exercise." So that's what it was, thought Shelley. Acid. "It's amazing what it does to the imagination," said Lemoyne. "Even just a taste. It makes you more present, more creative. You're going to love it," he said, gazing at her. "Shelley, right?" "Yeah," Shelley said, astonished. "It's for everyone," he said. "Socialism. See? I get it." He went back to the cockpit to retrieve an aluminium cooler. "I brought dinner," he said when he re-emerged. "Vegetarian pad thai. Shelley, why don't you take that down to the camp and round up the others? Tom will be down in just a moment." He was giving her the brush off, but he touched her arm as he spoke and smiled. Shelley set off down the hill towards the shearing shed. Mira was already regretting having taken such a hard line on the LSD. "But you don't even drink coffee," she said. Lemoyne grinned at her. "I must say, I never picked you for a Puritan," he said. "Well, I guess not everybody is a total cliché," Mira snapped. He grinned wider. "Being a cliché can be very useful. It means people underestimate you. They reveal themselves." "We've actually been working pretty hard here," Mira said. "So maybe before you drop your tab of acid tonight, we could actually draw up a contract or something, just so we can be sure you're not stringing us along." "You're right," he said. "I have been stringing you along." She faltered, not understanding. "This is a rare experience for me," said Lemoyne. "This." He gestured at the space between them. "I've been wanting to enjoy it. Draw it out. But yes, let's get something down in writing. Good idea." Mira was blushing now. She felt that she had misjudged him, that she had failed to trust him, that she was in the wrong. Abruptly, he said, "I changed the code on the front gate." "What?" she said. "When?" "This morning," he said. "It's now 7172. I added 1 to every digit." "Hey," she said in a tone of offense, "it's lucky we didn't need the van today. We'd have been locked out." 7172, he said again. Should be easy to remember. It's kind of weird you changed it before telling us, she said, when we're the ones living here. He stared at her for a moment without blinking. Then he said, when my wife died, Mira, I had paparazzi at my front gate for a year. If I came out of my house, if I even opened a window, they'd yell at me. You knew about that helicopter, didn't you? They'd say. Was it murder? Or was it sabotage? Every allegation was utterly false and utterly obscene. But they were trying to make me angry. Because if I react, that's their story. But they're not breaking any laws. They're only asking questions. That's their job. They even used to say, is it true she's still alive? How cool is that? To a man whose wife is dead. Mira was appalled. God, she said, I'm so sorry, that's horrendous. So, I have to take certain precautions. She was blushing again. Yeah, she said, of course. And when Burnham Wood goes live, he shrugged. Well, I've been enjoying this, our little back and forth, and the privacy, but you're right. It's got to be about the work. He smiled at her a little sadly and gestured down the hill. Shall we head down? He had never spoken of his wife to her before. He had never spoken about any of his relatives, in fact, or any of his associates, or any of his friends. Perhaps he was starting to trust her, Mira thought as they set off down the slope. She felt a surge of pity for him, and then shame. That she had endured nothing in her own life that could possibly compare with what he had gone through.
Kerry Fox was reading Burnham Wood by Eleanor Catton. The novel was abridged by Sean Priest, and the producer is Ailey McCready. The news is next year on Radio 4, and then it's quiz time. Gabby Roslin hosts Gabby's Talking Pictures, our film quiz with John Thompson, Ellie Taylor, Marcus Brickstock, and Gary Wilmot. That's coming up in a couple of minutes. BBC News at 11 o'clock. MPs have overwhelmingly backed a report that found Boris Johnson repeatedly lied to Parliament about parties at Downing Street during lockdown. 7 MPs voted against the Privileges Committee's findings, while 354 endorsed the sanctions it recommended against the former Prime Minister. Labour have called Rishi Sunak, who has not had the debate, too weak to stand up to Mr Johnson. Our political correspondent, Ione Wells, watched the vote in the Commons.
The wide expectation was that the majority of MPs who took part in this vote would vote to back the findings of the report, that Boris Johnson deliberately misled MPs and the committee investigating him. It also means they voted to back the sanctions that were recommended by the report. Now, of course, he's already resigned as an MP, so the 90-day suspension that was recommended is mostly just symbolic, but there was also a recommended sanction to suspend his parliamentary pass.
A major search and rescue operation is underway in the North Atlantic for the 5 people missing in a submersible near the wreck of the Titanic. Contact was lost yesterday, almost 2 hours after the craft began its descent. A billionaire explorer from the UK, Hamish Harding, is understood to be one of those on board. David Cameron has told the COVID inquiry that there were some failures in the way his government prepared for future pandemics, but has denied that his austerity policies damaged the UK's ability to cope. The former Prime Minister said many consequences followed from the focus on flu rather than other respiratory illnesses. 9 Egyptian nationals who are accused of smuggling people who were on board a migrant boat which sank in the Mediterranean last week have pleaded not guilty at a court in southern Greece. 78 people are confirmed dead and hundreds more are feared missing. Ukraine's President Zelensky says his soldiers have not lost any of their positions in his country's counteroffensive, and that Russian troops have only lost ground. In his nightly address to Mr. Zelensky, said Ukrainian troops were advancing in some areas. Last week, Moscow claimed Kiev's offensive had stalled. BBC News.